Today, it's the secrets of the Federal Reserve. Eustace, the Federal Reserve, it says federal right on this book. That must mean it's a governmental agency, doesn't it?
Well, it means it's as federal as Federal Express. That's the true meaning of federal.
You mean to tell me that the United States government does not own the Federal Reserve System? Because it's my understanding that the Federal Reserve System controls the money of the populace, the general people of the United States. And are you telling me that it's not the government of the United States, the Federal Reserve?
Well, that is the secret of the Federal Reserve, is that it's not federal, and it has no reserves, and it's not a system at all. It's actually a criminal syndicate.
It's a criminal syndicate.
Well,
how can you say that? Tell us about that, Eustace Mullins.
Well, I can say that because north of here, there's a millionaire's retreat called Jekyll Island, Georgia, which for many years was the private preserve of some of the wealthiest families in the United States. They met there in secret in Thanksgiving of 1910 to draft a money monopoly plan which they intended to foist on the people of the United States. And because they met in secret, this was a criminal conspiracy, and the Federal Reserve System came out of a criminal conspiracy. That's why I call it a criminal syndicate, and anyone at the Department of Justice would have to agree with me on that.
Now, when they met, apparently, from what I've read, is that they said that at that time it was going to help the farmers because there was going to be more loans that would be available to farmers, and that the Federal Reserve System was for the middle-class American people. Is it true? I mean, in the long run, did it turn out to be a benefit to middle-class America, Eustace?
Well, their approach was that these very wealthy people were setting up this privately owned money monopoly to help everyone else. In other words, it was going to be compassion and caring all the way. And it was presented to Congress as a bank reform bill. And there were not going to be any more bank failures. There'd be no more monetary panics. There'd be no more financial depressions. And of course, from 1914, when they started in operation, we went right to 1929, the biggest crash we ever had.
Was the Federal Reserve System itself, was it also, do you think, partially responsible for World War I, Eustace Mullins?
Not partially, totally. You see, they had wanted to have a major war since 1885. The problem was all the European countries were bankrupt because they had central banks. Whenever you install a central bank in a country, that is a sure road to ruin for everyone in that country. And we prospered throughout the 19th century because we did not have a central bank.
Now, could you explain to me what a central bank is versus, shall we say, the national government bank? Because it's a little bit of verbicide here. We don't know. Federal Reserve, I mean, it seemed to me like the word federal itself, of course, we talked about, had to be a government institution. So if you could tell me the difference there.
Well, that phrase was coined by Paul Warburg, one of the original conspirators at Jekyll Island in 1910, for that very reason. He was a very clever person. And a central bank is different from an ordinary bank, is that an ordinary bank or a government bank would be a bank of the people to provide the people with money. And a central bank is a privately owned bank, which always takes the name of a country. You have the Bank of England, you have the Bank of Italy. These are privately owned banks which function as government banks, but except that the private owners get all the profits. And the people of the countries which have a central bank, they progressively become poorer. Now, when the Federal Reserve Act was passed by Congress in 1913, we had no national debt. The dollar was 100 cents in purchasing power. Today, we have $4 trillion. Where did you and I get $4 trillion in debt? Did you go out and spend a lot of money that you shouldn't have, or did I? Absolutely not.
Don't ask me that.
Well, I think you might spend $4 trillion, but it would take you a little while. But no, all that money not only has been wasted, but it's been deliberately wasted to put us into permanent debt situation.
Now, how was this money created? Because you're telling me that the government, our government ourselves, gave up the right to coin this money. And then all of a sudden the Federal Reserve System has the right to make dollar bills, Federal Reserve notes. Was there trickery involved there? But first of all, how did this happen? You talked about 1913, you talked about Jekyll Island. What were the mechanics that led to the change from the government owning the money and issuing the money to its people versus the Federal Reserve?
Well, I mentioned the conspiracy at Jekyll Island because it took a lot of plotting to get the people of the United States to accept a privately owned central bank. You see, we had one set up by Alexander Hamilton in 1787, the first bank of the United States. And Thomas Jefferson opposed it, and he got rid of it in 1812, so that caused the War of 1812. The British attacked us again in 1812 because Jefferson had put an end to their bank, and they retaliated with the War of 1812. In fact, you will find banking interests behind every major event of world history. They pull the strings. We're just puppets. The governments are puppets, and that's why the War of 1812 happened. The Civil War, World War I, World War II, you name it. They're bankers' wars.
I've been told and I've heard that World War I, just take that for example, there's probably no reason at all to ever have World War I. There was an assassination, and then there was a demand for an apology, and the apology was given, and pretty soon, shortly after that, Europe was entered into the war, the United States was entered into the war. And could you explain to me what Belgian relief plan was as far as World War I?
The Belgian relief plan was to relieve the Belgians who didn't need any relief. It was actually, you see, in 1916, Germany, through private sources, approached the Allied governments and said, I'm sorry, we can't go on with the game, you know, because to them, to the bankers, war is a game. They set up two opposing teams and have them play each other, and they're making money from both sides. So the game had gone on for 2 years, financed by the Federal Reserve System of the United States in 1914. As I said, they had no money for this war. But by passing the Federal Reserve Act, suddenly the money and credit of the American people was made available to the central banks of Europe to finance the First World War. That's the reason you had it. That's why you had all that bloodshed. That's why you had the suffering. That's why you had the collapse of monarchical governments in much of Europe, all brought about as a banking conspiracy. So in 1916, the Kaiser said, look, we're bankrupt, we're out of food, we have no fuel, so we're going to sue for peace. Well, this did not fit in with the program of the international bankers because they hadn't even gotten the United States into the war yet in 1916, and that was part of the plan, that we had to get into it. So they said, all right, we'll take care of you. We'll get you food, and we'll get you fuel, and we'll get you money. Well, the money was no problem, because these international bankers operate all over the world. They got him the money. But the food was a different situation. How was the United States to furnish food to Germany so they could continue to fight for another 2 years? And so it had to be done through subterfuge, and so they called upon Herbert Hoover, an old Rothschild employee, whom they had hired, by the way, because he had been barred for life on the London Stock Exchange as a notorious swindler. And the Rothschilds said, get this guy, we need him. So he went to work for them. And sure enough, in World War I, they said, Herbert Hoover is the man to set up a Belgian relief commission to feed Germany so we can have another 2 years of World War. And that's exactly what happened. The great engineer, he was called. He was there, actually, the great engineer.
2 years longer for that war, anyway.
Well, he was the great swindler. He was the most notorious promoter of mining stocks in the world. And, you know, he particularly promoted gold mining stocks. And, you know, a gold mine is a mine in which someone sells you the stock in a gold mine, and they take the gold and give you the shaft. And so this was Herbert Hoover's background. He'd always given people the shaft. And so they said, now he's on the biggest swindle of all time. He's going to operate the Belgian Relief Commission. And he said, yes, I'll run the Belgian Relief Commission for you. We'll feed Germany with one proviso. I get all the money. And he did. Herbert Hoover came out of World War I, and the Belgian Relief Commission is one of the richest men in the world.
No, it's my understanding that actually in World War I, 21,000 people in America also became millionaires amid the death and the destruction and the slaughter and the hardships of these soldiers. 21,000 people actually became millionaires. Does war itself, does it create different classes of individuals from a financial standpoint?
Well, war is enormously profitable because it's so destructive. You see, modern technology and modern industry produces so much that the competition drives the prices down, everybody goes bankrupt. So you have a war, and it destroys so much that then everybody gets rich again, replacing all the stuff that was destroyed in the war. That's the story of modern economy.